Hello, I'm your host, Effie Pilarinu, and today I have a pleasure to have with us a fantastic guest, Jennifer Wines, who is a brilliant entrepreneur and author. She comes from the traditional world of private wealth management. She's worked at Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and Fidelity, and she's a certified private wealth advisor and the author of the newly published Wiley book, Invisible Wealth. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you so much for having me, Effie. I'm really excited to be here.
Me too. I mean, we both met in person in Davos at the World Economic Forum earlier this year, and you were waiting for your baby to be delivered, right?
Indeed.
And I can't imagine, how excited you are about this. And I'm very excited to talk about this new way of thinking of wealth. Before we deep dive into your book, it seems to me that you are addressing heads-on the one-dimensional way of thinking about wealth that we have. Why? Let's start with that. Why?
Mm-hmm. It's a really good question, and I think in our current world today, we're redefining, we're revisiting so much in our lives, right? And that's a consequence, in my mind, most recently of course, the pandemic, which really brought to head a lot of issues for a lot of people in different ways. And so the revisiting, reimagining, redefining of wealth for me is something that made a lot of sense for three reasons. So one, I fell in love with the written word during law school. Words are utterly powerful, right? And so the words are powerful because they represent something. They have a definition. So what is that definition and how do we use this language is incredibly interesting and important. So number two, of course, being in traditional wealth management, as you mentioned, and over thousands of client conversations, I started to realize that the conversations were shifting. They were shifting with my clients, they were shifting within myself and shifting with friends, right? In terms of what we're valuing and why. And then the third, kind of always having this innovative forward-looking view, it's kind of my entrepreneurial spirit, which I think we all have, is thinking through what is the future of wealth, right? And how are we reconceptualizing wealth for the new paradigm that we're stepping into? And so for these three reasons, I think the birthing of invisible wealth came to form, invisible being another word for intangible, and intangible assets and all the things that we value despite our inability to touch them. So it's basically a blending of the three things. So writing, exposure to wealth and wealth management, and of course, innovation.
And Jennifer, when we think about invisible wealth, and it would be great to understand it even better. How does it connect with the goal-based wealth management? And I ask this because, as you said, we are used to thinking in certain definitions, of course, in language always. And when we think of wealth management, we think of goals, basically goal-based investing in the best case. So how does that connect with your concept of invisible wealth?
So you're exactly right. When you're doing it right, you're thinking about wealth in the right way, you have wealth goals. And in order to understand what your wealth goals are, you of course need to understand what you value and what you want to attain more of, right? And so people have wealth goals, and I'm taking a step back and thinking through when I was in the advisor seat and advising clients, we would think through, okay, what do you want to accomplish and why? And oftentimes the financial objective is directly linked to an undercurrent of, I want more time with my kids, or I want to be able to retire by age, why? And so these financial goals are directly pegged to these more abstract goals relating to the broader concept of wealth. And so with this in mind, the invisible wealth concept, so broad stroke, and I'll get more directly to your question as it relates to wealth goals, but the invisible wealth concept is the idea that technological advancements and societal shifts are propelling us into a new paradigm, right? And this new paradigm is thereby inviting us to revisit what we value and why. And when we revisit value, we inherently revisit wealth, because we're wealthy when we have an abundance of what we value. So again, we're wealthy, right, when we have an abundance of what we value. And this question is permeating the zeitgeist, both, on an individual level and of course on a societal level. And so that's why we have a ripe opportunity to kind of reconceptualize and redefine wealth. So the invisible wealth concept is such that we're placing a premium perhaps on intangible assets today more so than ever before. That's both practically and pragmatically, as well as philosophically. So that's the concept, broad stroke. The framework for invisible wealth, and this is getting closer to your question, the framework for invisible wealth includes 5 principles in my mind of what wealth in this new paradigm embodies. And so these 5 principles for concept. So 1 is a wealth of money and investment. 2, a wealth of health and quality of life. 3, a wealth of knowledge, status, influence. 4, a wealth of time, energy, money. And 5, a wealth of relationship with self and others. So of these 5 principles, there's going to be a point in time where Effie might be focused on money, right? Or she might be focused on relationships right now. But either way, your financial goals are going to align to which of the 5 principles take primacy in your life right now.
Or what allocations, what weights you put to each one of these 5s, and these weights might change over time.
Precisely. And that's why, in traditional wealth management and even, the new iterations of wealth management that are coming online, literally and figuratively, there's always the invitation to explore what are your values, what are your goals? And it's really important to think about. And sometimes it's hard to take this abstraction and bring it into action. And that's why, the third kind of point in the book is a personal wealth algorithm that I developed. The personal wealth algorithm being 3 steps that people can use to identify their concept of wealth at a point in time in their life. So you might use this algorithm today, right? You might sit down and do these 3 steps and say, okay, at this point in time in my life, I'm super focused on knowledge, status, influence, right? I want to accumulate more knowledge. I want to share this with the world on LinkedIn. You have so many platforms, right? That might be the primary focus in your life right now. And that's important to realize, because that's where your resources are going to go, whether it's financial resources, your time, your energy, these types of things.
Assets in a much broader sense than just the financial contracts that we're used to, right?
Yeah, in a much broader sense. But what's interesting is that, okay, the accumulation of knowledge, status, influence also reveals itself financially, right? There's financial implications to attaining these assets such as knowledge, status, and influence. And so it's how do we wield these intangibles that we want to accumulate, these resources, and how they ultimately reveal themselves perhaps in an economic sense, which is also quite fascinating.
Amazing. I mean, this has it links very much to so many aspects of life, as you said. If you're younger, in your career planning and your personal life at every stage of your life, and then in terms of personality, what maybe you do want more influence, or you do desire more social to build more social assets, if you want. It's really amazing. Jennifer, on the other hand, when I, of course, I easily retreat to the traditional thinking, and I can never forget that when I started my career on Wall Street, and I'm sure that you've experienced that narrative. They used to say that wealthy is the person that can borrow the most. Of course, that was, again, only with a narrow view of wealth in terms of money and investments. And therefore, that was the thinking. And I'm not sure that translates too much within your framework. But today, when a traditional but yet open-minded person looks at wealth management, we have all these disruptive technologies, artificial intelligence, tokenization, blockchain, that could tokenize also intangible assets. Do these advanced technologies mix with your multidimensional definition of wealth, or are they sort of clashing, or maybe one part of it?
Yeah, you make a really good point, and that's right. You have a really dynamic background yourself, Wall Street and all of this, and everything that you do right now. I think you focus a lot on the next iteration of finance, right, and investing. And you're right. The ideas relating to tokenization, to AI, all fold into the first principle relating to wealth of money and investment, and how we're reimagining that. And so how are we reimagining how we're making money? How are we reimagining how we're investing, and also how we're spending money? And the intangible forces that are technology these days are really helping to enhance, the financial infrastructure in industry. And, so for example, and you mentioned leverage before. It's funny because in my mind, I think about AI as leverage, right? So people are using AI as leverage to do different things to make money. And so all of these things are going back to our previous point of you and knowledge, status, influence, just for an example, all of that is leverage as well. So we're taking this concept of, okay, leverage in the traditional sense and mapping it onto a different application. So to get back to tokenization, for example, you're right. I mean, the blockchain technology is enabling us to tokenize assets. And, that's unlocking the ability to democratize wealth in ways that wasn't available in times past. And so with this democratization of wealth, of course, that means that more people have more access to more money, or the ability to grow their money and the value of their money than ever before. So I think that technology, AI, tokenization, these two technologies that you mentioned, definitely fold into the invisible wealth paradigm, into the intangible wealth paradigm, particularly within the first principle of wealth of money and investment.
Yeah, I mean, Jennifer, I see this. What I'm not clear, and I'd love your insight, is the broader dimensions that you have introduced in this framework that we either don't think about, or in the best case, we think of them, but in a very siloed way, right? Very fragmented way. Does your framework facilitate, if you want, the connection between, the traditional narrow one-dimensional definition of wealth and the rest of the other four principles?
So I think, having a more expanded concept and definition of wealth enables a more expanded multidimensional application of wealth, right? Because oftentimes we're limited by virtue of a definition. I'll caveat that with saying, I don't suggest that each word should have this kind of multidimensional definition, but the concept of wealth demands it, particularly in the paradigm that we're shifting into. And that was reflected back to me through thousands of clients of conversations of people who have attained great financial wealth, right? And the conversation was more oriented towards these other attributes of wealth within their lives. And of course, how money folds into that. And I by no means negate the necessity or the power of financial wealth. That's important.
Security,
right?
at least. Security.
Security, and then even eventually innovation, right? Because if you have enough money that you feel secure, right? You have enough money to cover you for the next X amount of years, the more inclined you are to innovate, right? To take a risk, because your downside protection is somewhat, taken care of by virtue of your bank account, how much money you have. So, case in point, I left my job April of last year, and I left a great company, a great team, and great clients. That wasn't easy, but I knew that I wanted to step into the unknown and explore something else. And I was able to do that because I had saved and strategized to be able to take this risk. Similarly, a lot of entrepreneurs and innovators think the same way, right? They have their assets, they have
they have some bootstrapping cushion, if you want, to take this risk.
Exactly. And if they don't, they have a good network and they fundraise, or a little combination of both. But ultimately, money, is your leverage in this case, and invites innovation. And so that invitation to innovate for individuals is ultimately really productive for society. And I think that that's an invisible force that can't be negated or overlooked, because as we're progressing, we need innovators to think through the application of blockchain, to think through the application of AI, to take the risks, to be in a position to take the risks, and ultimately society benefits from that, right? So there's a lot of aspects at play here, and again, it does fold into the multi-definitional kind of concept of wealth. But I get, traditionally people are thinking, no, wealth is an abundance of money and material possessions. Yes, and, right? So the new paradigm that we're stepping into, particularly as it relates to wealth, is a and paradigm versus an or paradigm. And so I think we need to really embody and embrace that mentality in order to live a more rich and holistic life.
And it was very interesting that the point you made about thinking of AI tools, for example, as leverage, the same way that we think of the financial leverage when we have a certain amount of money and investments, and we have a relationship with a broker or whatever, and we can take on some leverage with some parameters, and there's an analogy there to think of the technology and being a digital participant in the digital economy, I guess, that we can act like that and leverage these technologies towards these other aspects of wealth that you have mentioned. It was really very, how can I say, revealing to me the way you spoke about this.
Yeah, and thank you. And I think that, again, AI is leverage if we use it as such. And I think technology, broadly speaking, has always invited us to delegate the mundane so that the human spirit, if you will, can play in a sandbox of more creativity, more potential, more innovation. So technology, as it upgrades, right, invites us to upgrade our own software internally. And so I think that's really important to think through is how are we continuing to evolve? Meanwhile, technology isn't allowing that to happen, to us to kind of reach a higher octave of our own knowledge, our own capacity, our own innovation.
This is another interesting way to look at things. And now that you say that, I'm thinking that these advanced technologies are more interactive than the previous generation. And therefore, there's more expansive possibilities, good ones and bad ones always for us. But on an individual basis, there's a lot of potential by leveraging these technologies. And as you said, I mean, anecdotally, I see it in my circle and in business communities that I'm involved. There's so much more community-driven discussions around issues that are not strictly business related and deal related, but are so much more broadly about the community, about us quality of life, the other principles that you spoke about, and they are converging in a way that was never broadly existing around us before.
I really like that word that you just used, converging, because you're absolutely right. All of these, if you think about it just from the invisible wealth framework, they're all converging, they all support each other. And your community, and I know we share a lot of overlap in our communities, everyone is aggregating and organizing around values, right? So what do we value in a qualitative sense to then create value, a quantitative sense, predicated on those values. And so we're self-organizing by virtue of values to create value in really productive ways. And that's happening whether it be online, right? But before we hopped on here to press record, we were chatting about a lot of people that that you haven't met in person yet, but my God, how powerful is that you're able to connect with people based upon relevancy over proximity. Like that's incredible. And it's all, I believe oriented towards, work stuff perhaps, or exploration or knowledge or expansion or innovation. And these are people that you also enjoy because you all share the same values. So they're friendships too.
Exactly. Yeah. Digital communities, digital networks, not in the very flat sense of the first generation of social media platforms that is already seasoned at least, right? But with these new technologies that really allow us to be part of different clusters, different digital communities with common values, really. And being collaborative and using in an iterative way these technologies. This is invisible wealth that we've never had the opportunity to have before. We always spoke about physical social networks and physical business networks. We moved to digital and more invisible business networks, but now I think we are in a second iteration that's much, much deeper and more meaningful, clearly.
Yeah, definitely deeper and more meaningful. And again, just to go back to the leverage point, for example, it's like the digital aspect of a community can fortify the in-person, experiences. So for example, we were together in Switzerland at the beginning of the year, and that was so powerful, right? But now we're able to add another dimension to the relationship, in the sense that we're able to map on the digital relationship as well. And so we have both. And so again, the new paradigm is an and paradigm versus an or paradigm. And that adds more dimension to our lives and the way that we think about value and values.
Great. Jennifer, tell our audience where they can find you and what your activities are around this invisible wealth and the principles of the new paradigm.
Sure. So I am mostly on LinkedIn, just like you. I think LinkedIn is one of the eighth wonders of the world. It's a wonderful platform. So I'm available and accessible there, as well as my own website, which is jenniferwines.com. And of course, the book published by Wiley is through many distribution channels, but you can find it readily and easily via Amazon.
Thank you so much for being with us, Jennifer.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.